very interesting discussion here from Keith. Keeping on track with technology and entertainment, will you please give a big round of applause for Keith Boesky?
Thank you. Gentlemen, thank you. So the printing that you were showing, the other thing that's happening right now is if you choose to have something that's more detailed that looks like something an action figure would buy off your shelf, you can print out through Shapeways, send it right to them. They'll print it out in ceramic, multicolor, metal, all kinds of things. And Amazon is actually putting really elaborate, super elaborate printers in all their distribution stations. So you can send something to be print, have it come through Amazon Prime within 24 hours, and sometimes the same day, you'll have just something insane that's changing the world. The other thing I want to say before I get started is listening to Brent is just telling me another reason why I want to be a Bushnell. And I want to make the suggestion that we should take the concept of the merger of imagination and engineering and making, and I think we should just call that Bushnelling. And when Nolan Brent just threw out that there are so many different blue men, and he can have blue men everywhere. Nobody knows the blue men that you're talking about. I remember when Nolan told me about Chuck E. Cheese, and Chuck E. Cheese wasn't about the pizza, and it wasn't about the toys, it was about the mouse. Because he could make a robotic mouse and put a mouse everywhere. So Brent grew up with that, and that kind of thought. And like I said, I just love to be a Bushnell. So anyway, I got excited about this concept of the echo chamber. I've come here before and I talked about games, and I think just about exclusively games. But we're talking about the future, and Gray mentioned that that's where he wanted to cover, and I wanted to talk about how we can influence the future that's happening instead of it happening by default. And it's really the connection of meat space with the technology space that we're talking about. And it first came to me when I saw this thing come up on Facebook a little bit ago. Some of you may have seen it, where you could say, which one of your friends are following Donald Trump? And I looked at it and said, okay, well, that's a cute little funny thing, I can look. And then the next thing that happened is people said, okay, well, I don't want you to be my friend, and I don't want you to be in my news feed if you like Trump. And then the next thing that happened is people actually started doing it. And they actually started unfriending people and cleaning up their news feed to only have the perspective that they wanted. And it creates a great conversation because nobody's disagreeing with you, and that's really nice. And you've also got that extra, or if you look in the studies that were done, and this one was actually done by the National Science Academy when we didn't know about it, and they were looking at our Facebook feeds and seeing how we felt about it. And that's a whole nother conversation about the government getting involved in our news feeds. And then they saw that we actually do make ourselves measurably happier by culling our news feed. And then we also have the byproduct of making it so that we feel better than other people. I feel this way, you don't, and all of a sudden I'm better than that. And Dr. Seuss told us all about that one. But other people told us that it's not good to have friends based on their agreement with you. We have to expand our world because that's how we evolve as people. But the real danger happens is that the selection right now, and this is where technology meets the meat space, isn't happening by us. So as we start to cull our news feed, as we start to decide what information we want to receive, the machines are learning about us. And we think that we're in control of that, but we're really not, because what's happening is our entire worldview is changing based on the people that who we decide to associate with. So when we go out into the real world and we do a Google search or a Bing search or your search engine of choice, we think we're seeing what's out there. Most people do. Maybe people are more sophisticated and some of you understand, but we're not. So we're limiting our universe by who we're choosing, and they're feeding us the information. So I went back and I looked and I started to think about, how do we get to this place? How do we get to the place, and why are we changing now that we don't want to accept this outside input? And I looked at the beginning of television. When television started out, we had 3 channels. And the 3 channels were unbiased. And that's actually the second logo for ABC, but I thought it was kind of cool because it looked like the Trojans were going to attack the other 2 channels. So when the government gave these channels to the networks, they were concerned that the networks weren't going to provide the information to the public, so they gave another channel to the public airwaves, and this is PBS. And this kind of tells you from the very beginning, this was their first logo, why PBS doesn't attract an awful lot of people. So this was PBS. And then all of a sudden, a major event happened.
To say that we are closer to victory today is to believe, in the face of the evidence, the optimists who have been wrong in the past. To suggest we are on the edge of defeat is to yield to unreasonable pessimism. To say that we are mired in stalemate seems the only realistic, if unsatisfactory, conclusion. On the off chance the military and political analysts are right, in the next few months we must test the enemy's intentions in case this is indeed his last big gasp before negotiations. But it is increasingly clear to this report that the only rational way out then will be to negotiate, not as victors, but as an honorable people who lived up to their pledge to defend democracy and did the best they could. This is Walter Cronkite. Good night.
So now this is significant because until then, reporters were objective on these channels. This was a scarce commodity, and it was limited. And for the very first time, the most trusted man in America at a time when everybody watched the 6 o'clock news, the most trusted man in America said, "There are dangerous waters out there. Come on into my lifeboat. I have an opinion. I'm going to start to express it." And we started to look at the news that we consume differently and the use of the airwaves differently. When cable started, we had a couple of channels that started up. CNN said, we're going to go out and we're going to send reporters all over the world and we're going to bring back an objective news service. Whether you believe it's objective or not is a different story. Again, it's a different conversation, but we're going to have an objective news source. ESPN just brought the news in. And then, all of a sudden, these airwaves started to be populated by channels with bias. And it started to be okay, because if they're channels with bias, I can still go out and I can pick my channel that I want to see, but there's a whole sea of channels out there. And I start to see these other opinions, and I can hear these other opinions, and to get to my channel, I have to see these other channels. So if I happen to be a polygamist prone to addiction with a fetish for little people, and maybe a little bit of an inclination towards pedophilia, there's a channel for me. And that's okay. And nobody's going to judge me for going to that channel. But then, now, I was sitting at the Milken Conference on the future of California, and that's not the joke part of somebody named Boesky sitting at the Milken Conference on the future of California. But I was sitting at the Milken Conference on the future of California, and somebody from the NAACP raised their hand and said, "Are you concerned about the marginalization of minority groups based on giving them their own channels?" So what happens is when there's a distribution channel, not only do people have a place to look, but now when we're in the sea of channels, their voice gets marginalized because it doesn't make it into the mainstream. And we're learning now that we're picking. We don't have access to all the information that's out there, because in the old days, we would use an electronic programming guide, or the British tabloids that are notoriously biased and chosen because they're biased, and people read them because they're biased. People would have to see all the other headlines when they went to the newsstand. And when you turned on your television channel, you would see that. But now, how many people in this room within the last week turned on their TV and looked at an electronic programming guide to see what's on? Okay, a minority of people. So people are still doing it, but it's minority and it's generational. Because we're training our kids right now not to look at everything that's available, but to make the selection of what they want immediately. So these kids are growing up in a world where they go to exactly what they want, deeper into that echo chamber. And we've talked about it before. When we talked about search and machine language and all that, we talked about serendipity and how we're going to lose serendipity. Well, that's already gone. Serendipity is only a restaurant now in New York. And if you happen to be there, they do have this amazing thing called frozen hot chocolate that you shouldn't miss, because it is very, very good. But aside from the fact of serendipity, we're losing the more important thing, which is dissension. And when we look at our great leaders and what they said before, we have to listen to those diverse opinions. This is how we grow. This is how we evolve. We have a very boring state of affairs and really useless progression in an organization if we don't have the dissenting opinions. And the dissenting opinions, the things that we don't necessarily want to hear, the things that are uncomfortable, are the things that make us evolve and get us to a better place. They lead to innovation. This was a great headline that I saw the other day where when I was putting this thing together that says that the G20 had a better consensus because they didn't agree. If they were living in their echo chambers because they trained their news feeds to give them the only information they wanted and the search engines learned that this is the information that makes them happy, they would have just walked in and say, hey, everything's cool, and walked out, and we wouldn't have a great agreement. So now I've given you this overwhelming problem that the machines are working against us, and you don't want to be on the other side of the Googles because we know who's going to win. So what are we supposed to do as little people? There's nothing that we can do. But like I said when I started, I want to talk about creating the future that we want instead of creating the future by default. And we're on the path of the future happening by default when we go and we make ourselves happy by choosing only the things that we want. But every one of us in this room can go ahead and think about what we're doing, be conscious of what's happening, and realize that we can architect the future that we want. And we're already doing it here in this group. So anybody who's on the Metal mailing list and has stayed involved in an email thread that Ken started that has input from Michael Robertson and actually responded to Michael is playing a part in making the future unfold in a way that we would want it to unfold. So keep the dissenting opinions. Don't unfriend the people from your timelines. Keep looking at the things you don't agree with, and every once in a while, turn on the TV and check out an EPG. Thank you.
Awesome stuff. So to quickly sort of, for the new members here who won't be aware of your background, you were heavily involved in the gaming industry, background as a lawyer, you're an agent at ICM, involved Lara Croft, Prince of Persia. Having vision into the entire infrastructure of the industry from that point of view, do you think we are going to keep progressing into more and more echo chambers, or is there going to be some sort of new type of discussion board that we're going to see? Is there going to be a new news feed? Where are we going to keep going with all of this?
There was a friend and I were working on a game about the singularity, and we were at a conference with Marvin Minsky was there, and we went up to him and we said, we're doing this game about the singularity and about robots and sentience and all of this. What do you think is going to happen? And Marvin Minsky said, well, did you see the movie The Terminator? And yeah. He said, well, it's going to be like that. In terms of the echo chambers and stuff like that, I mean, my reaction is, well, have you seen the movie Idiocracy? It's going to be like that. Because Henry Ford said that if he used focus groups and relied on people, he would have made a faster horse, right? So and Steve Jobs said that people don't know what they want. It's a shortening, but anyways, people don't know what they want. And if we look at the mass of people who are out there consuming, and it's not that people are stupid, people are very, very smart because they adopt new things. But if we look at the mass of people and what they're consuming, and then they will keep wanting to consume what they have right now and not advance. If we, as individuals, are given the opportunity to take all of the unpleasantness out of our life, and don't get me wrong, I'd love to, but if we can take all the unpleasantness out of our life, we will, and that will put us into a place where we don't pay attention. And we're seeing it in action right now. When you see a stalemate in Congress right now, that's because nobody's listening to the other side. And I had this discussion with my wife this morning when we were talking about what I was going to say. And we have to not only think about what we're taking in, but we have to think about how we deal with other people, right? So morality is how we treat other people, and ethics is how we want to act as a society. And as we open these doors and bring these things in, we have to realize that we have to speak with respect. The internet and these social media and communication channels give us that anonymity that lets people say things that they shouldn't necessarily, that they wouldn't say face to face.
And that in itself is almost, it's today's age. If you just have a look at the comments on YouTube videos and so on,
Exactly.
it's an anonymous world.
And there are ways to deal with this. If you look at Riot Games, they have a policy called PB&J. It's personal, I don't know what the P is. It's behavior and justice. It's positivity, whatever it is. They've got this policy where they reward people for good behavior, and their forums are insanely friendly, and everybody's friendly. So just thinking about them, about establishing an environment where people treat each other with respect. I mean, I saw this about, I think it was Snapchat. Somebody said, you're talking about YouTube and Twitter, but I saw a very popular Snapchat personality saying that the feedback on Snapchat is very, very positive relative to the attacks on Twitter.
And so with that sort of platforms in mind, talking to, like a crowd like this, we certainly have that level-headed, yes, can have a discussion. En masse, that is a harder thing to get across. Do you think that it is actually just going to become more and more and more like 4chan and these forums like Reddit, where it is very hyper-focused? Or how do we actually get the masses at large to be more accepting? That's a bigger question than probably you can answer today.
I think it starts, and I had this conversation yesterday with somebody who was running 2,000 preschools. And this is something that Brent would buy into. What we haven't accepted is that the way that we learn is different now, and the tools that we need to learn, like Brent was saying, are different. And when I went to school, a teacher would tell me what I was supposed to learn and tell me the beginning, the middle, and the end of the subject. When my son went to school, and this was early in the days of the internet, he's about to be 21 this year, but if he was interested in a subject, he would drill down deeper. The instruction was the starting point. So when we're talking about the masses, the information is out there. We have to understand how to do it and how to access. In terms of interacting with each other, the communities that form, we're scratching the surface of community when we're doing something on Facebook. The communities that form are the communities of people who are interested in esoteric things. My son started studying 17th century watchmaking online and building watches and communicating with people. Engineers, communicating is different for
He
them
can
than
learn
it is
as
for us.
much as he wants.
Yeah,
about that
but we
subject.
would call that the engineering form of communication is what he does with other people in that community. So organized around community, great discussion. So that's what we're going to see. I think that if we push through this veneer of people talking at each other and addressing political issues on a very superficial level, and we get underneath of the community with a sincere interest, I think we're going to see a big change. And I think that's really the evolution that we can direct, and that's what we can hope for.
And that is a wonderful almost precursor. We're going to do a session on Reddit today that is almost a brilliant precursor into, echo chambers of discussion, but how you can still have mass engagement.
And if you watch what happens on Reddit, when you have a Reddit discussion, if somebody comes in for an AMA, the community self-enforces, the community polices. If you've got a troll in an AMA, the community's going to jump all over them and tell them that you're not respecting that person, and you're not respecting another commenter. So
it's almost policing. Yeah.
Exactly.
Sensational. Keith, thank you so much
Oh,
for
it's my
jumping up
pleasure.
on stage. Absolute pleasure.